All right, I think we're recording. Welcome, everybody. My name is Peter Loge. I'm the director of the Project on Ethics in Political Communication at the George Washington University. First thing to know is hopefully we are recording, so whatever we say will be preserved. I'll email around a link to the recording the next day or so. I'll put it on the Project on Ethics on Political Communication website. Share it, tell your friends. The Project on Ethics and Political Communication, as all of you know because you're here, promotes the study, teaching, and practice of political communication ethics. We do this by asking the question, what ethical responsibility, if any, do political communication professionals have, and to whom or what do they have them? We try to answer this question a number of ways. One is writing stuff for the political and popular press, sometimes the academic press, talking to reporters about what's ethical and what might not be ethical, giving talks online, in person. If you're interested, drop me a line. We work with the University of Texas, Austin on classroom-ready case studies on political communication ethics. And of course, occasionally host conversations like this one with political practitioners who are actually doing this stuff. So let's get right to it. Last week, I'm here with Andrew Doty and Dustin Wahl, and last week, Andrew and I were, or a couple weeks ago, Andrew and I were talking about some of the work he's doing and the intersection of the incentives for political behavior and then how one actually behaves, right? It's really easy to talk about how one ought to behave on a campaign or, when talking about politics or legislation or politicians, but ultimately you do what you're rewarded for, right? No one's ever been paid for running a beautiful but losing campaign, at least not more than once. So the question then is, how do we structure the rules in such a way that make it more likely to get better campaigns that result in better outcomes, better policy outcomes, and a less awful politics? We often set that debate aside from the political communication debate, but as Andrew pointed out, the two are intimately connected. And what are the ethics then of the advocacy for structural changes to create changes that make for better politics? How does all that go together? And he suggested his friend Dustin Wahl, who's also working in this space, to talk about this. I'll give their brief bios, ask them each to describe their work in more detail, and we'll get right to the conversation. I know a bunch of folks submitted questions ahead of time. We're going to try to get to those. If you have others, put them in the Q&A. We'll get to what we can, and we'll be out of here by 1:30. So the bios, getting to the bios, which you read when you responded to the invite, and they mailed me. So none of this is news. Andrew advises the Center on Civility and Democracy at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, and has consulted for a number of political reform organizations, including the Rebuild Congress Initiative, Open Primaries, and Protect Democracy. Dustin was the communications director for the Dan Osborne Independent Campaign for U.S. Senate in Nebraska in 2024. A fascinating race for those of you who follow politics closely. He's created and led several advocacy efforts, including a campaign to promote accountability at his alma mater, Liberty University. He's been featured in the New Yorker, New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, BBC, and the Hulu documentary, God Forbid. These are folks who are doing the work of politics and also doing the work of political reform. Andrew, what more should people know about your work and what you're doing and what brings you to this?
Yeah, thanks for having me here today, Peter. I've long appreciated knowing you, working with you since I was a grad student at University of Chicago. Yes, as you noted, I'm currently advising the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. They are, I would say, one of my clients. I'm an independent political reform consultant, which means I work with nonprofits and other organizations trying to improve our political institutions and political culture. There are a number of really interesting initiatives going on at the Reagan Center. Most of those are focused on political culture rather than changing the institutions per se. Yeah, and I should also note I don't have quite the bona fides as Dustin, but I have worked extensively in local politics in Arizona, and then I helped advise, and I was a county captain in Prince George's County for the Hogan for Maryland Senate campaign this past cycle. And so that's a bit about me.
And you've also got the best background of the three of us, and I do appreciate that two of the three of us are Arizona political veterans. I do like that about it. Dustin, you're doing some really cool stuff.
Well, thanks for having me, Peter. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to. So yeah, Fix Our House is my organization. We started about 3 years ago, and are focused on Capitol Hill. there's kind of a wide network of groups that do electoral reform. We're one of them. We focus on a thing called proportional representation, which is kind of the name for a lot of different systems of conducting elections, where your percentage of support from voters directly determines your percentage of seats won in the legislature. So the outcomes are proportional and actually match what voters say they want. So it's not a reform that's going to be realized tomorrow, but one of the key benefits that we focus on is how it'll make for more ethical politics, for more functional politics that actually address the problems of constituents, and political communication is a big part of that.
So what are your ethical limits in that, Dustin? I mean, on one hand, you're working in the political system, right? You make your living working in politics. And on the other hand, you're saying, but our system is broken. What are the ethics of working in a system that you think is broken? And at what point should you just walk away from it?
Well, I think for those of us that love democracy and care about freedom and those kind of principles, that we have an obligation to always be working for a better system. You can live in the most oppressive regime in the world where there's no incentive structure to do anything good and helpful, but we still, I think, in that system would have an obligation to work for to improve it, to make it better. Ours is far from that, but we do have a very broken incentive structure that is plugging our politics in all sorts of ways. I'm sure all of the listeners right now can think of their own examples. So I think it's both and. We have an obligation to work within the system as it exists, to do to play by the rules, but to operate within the system and within the incentive structure as it exists, while also trying to do what we can to change and improve it. And I think within that, we don't have to, always, get down in the mud and operate on the most cynical level. I think that there's, and we can get into this more, I'm sure, but a natural reward that comes from honesty and from showing voters that we can do better in politics. People want hope, and that's something that a good campaign can offer.
So Andrew, what about that ethical line? Is it, I mean, you work exclusively at this point or mostly at this point in just making the politics better space?
Yeah.
But at the same time, if there are problems with politics, how do you respond to this?
That's a great question. I think sometimes people have this mindset of you can either work in the system or on the system. And I don't think that's true. I think you can do both. I think you can do both independently, like I've done, helping the Hogan campaign on the one hand, working for a nonpartisan, non-political institution, the Reagan Foundation, on the other. Or you can kind of do both in one. Like I think Dustin's work might not technically qualify as both in one, but certainly he's working to fix our political institutions and has to be aware of political realities as he does that. One thing I would say, just to loop back to this idea of we have to get in the mud to succeed. That's not always true. It's definitely not always true. So just to name two examples that are fresh in my mind, Mamdani in New York City, very, very positive campaign. Definitely criticized the current administration, but if you watch his videos, he's a pretty upbeat guy. He's not there to bash anybody. He's just promoting the policies he think will make the city better. Now, whether you disagree with those policies like I do, is a different question. But I would say he's run an ethical campaign in that sense. And then Larry Hogan. I don't think there is a candidate. If there is one, it would be Osborne's an independent. I don't think there's a candidate from this past election cycle for Senate who outperformed their party's presidential nominee more than Larry Hogan did in Maryland. Now, part of that is his reputation and his the ethos that he brings, which, by the way, that's another reason to be ethical in politics, is that you build a reputation over time. But also, I think it had a lot to do with his messaging. He ran a very positive, future-focused message. Was not really down, and he definitely criticized also Brooks. I wish he won, but but I think he ran a positive campaign as well.
So now, Dustin, I want to come back to this Mamdani campaign. You were nodding a lot, looked like you're taking a lot of notes. New York City has ranked choice voting, right? This is one of the changes that reformers say will help things get better, drive candidates to the middle, make less extreme campaigns. The Modder did not win that election. And we didn't need any additional incentives because he ran a positive campaign, right? When we were prepping for this call, you said you have friends who worked on the campaign. He said it's actually fun, right? It's been a long time since a lot of us had fun working in politics.
Yeah.
Is it a structure question, or is it just we need better candidates like Mamdani, like Osborne, like Hogan, who are just optimistic guys?
Well, I think it's both, and I do think you'll get more good candidates in a system that's better. That sort of naturally shows those guys that there's a chance. Your point about Mamdani is right, and I agree with what you said, Andrew. It was a joyful campaign. My friend Morris that worked on the campaign said that canvassing for Mamdani is like the new brunch in New York. People would just go out on the weekend and do it for fun because it was exciting. And some of that is that there was a joy to it because there's plenty of negative attacks at Cuomo that were well founded. I think that's fair game. But it wasn't a campaign of hatred and doom and gloom. It was a campaign of let's make people's lives better. So some of that is you got a really strong candidate, agree or disagree on the policies. You just have clearly a strong, talented candidate in Mamdani. Some of it is ranked choice voting. It seems that system allowed for instance, Brad Lander to cross endorse Mamdani and campaign sort of with Mamdani. They campaigned together, which is a unique situation that's unique to that voting system. I'm not ranked choice voting advocate per se. I think that a proportional system, you see a lot more of these positive incentives. We don't have any states in the country that use a proportional system. We have a few cities that do, and then most democracies around the world do. And the key thing there is that most of them are multi-party systems, or at least allow the two main parties to kind of fracture and have different factions. And what that does is it breaks up the binary divide that makes every election that's competitive an us versus them between just two choices. When you have that, you tend to just get more natural, us versus them kind of campaigning because it's close. And in that kind of contest, everything comes down to doing whatever you can to get one more vote than the other side. When you have, multiple candidates running in a seat where 30% of the vote wins your party 30% of the seats and not just nothing, that allows you, it incentivizes you to spend more time talking about what you would do if you were elected. And therefore, we see better policy outcomes in those countries as well.
So I have to ask in the obvious question, if you're talking about third-party candidates and mixing it up, a question I've been asked by reporters and others the past couple of weeks. What about Elon Musk's effort to start a new party and threats or promises, depending on your perspective, to drop millions of dollars on a dozen races around the country? Good thing?
Well, I'll jump in. I'm curious what Andrew has to say. I mean, I think it was funny to see the round of news stories over one Elon Musk tweet, because he said a lot of things that he doesn't necessarily stand by. But assuming he tries to go through with it, charging headlong into the two-party system just dooms the party that's closest to you. And so it seems like it would be a clear threat to Republicans in most cases. If you're the wealthiest person in the world, you can get across a lot of the barriers that prevent third parties from successfully forming now. There's a lot that money can buy you. So, if he actually worked really hard on it and funded it, he could potentially be competitive in a couple places, but it would mostly just hurt Republicans and hand the election to Democrats. Correct me if I'm wrong.
What do you think, Andrew?
No, Dustin, I think you're right. Let me put it this way. As much as I resonate with some of his criticisms of government, whether that's about government bloat and inefficiency, whether it's about the tax structure, whether it's our deficit, which is a huge issue that I don't know why we don't talk about more than we do. As much as I agree with him on a lot of these policy issues, starting a third party in the current system, I think you can win one-offs. I mean, I wrote like a little blog on this on my Medium. If you look at history, really a third party there have always been two party. As long as America's been around, we've had a two-party system. Now, if parties die and get replaced, the Republican Party was actually a third party at one point. That was a splinter from the Whigs in the mid 1800s, if you want to get really wonky. And maybe I doubt it, but maybe the America Party, or whatever Elon Musk is calling his party now, is this new third party that's going to take over. Maybe I would rather him, and I would welcome him, invest his resources in changing the incentive structure. So I don't work for Fix Our House, but I am a big fan of proportional representation. I'm a big fan of approval voting, if you've heard of that. I am also a fan of ranked choice voting, all of it. But I would rather see him put his money there, address the root causes. He's a really, really smart guy. I mean, look what he's done with SpaceX. Look what he's done with Tesla. Incredibly successful entrepreneur. Hard to argue against that. I would love to see him be that smart when it comes to politics.
So interesting. I want to push that a little bit. I do want to say, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. Type it into the Q&A. We're not going to be calling on folks live during this, so we can kind of keep the conversation going. I want to ask another strategic question as we get to this that Musk kind of gets to, kind of not. In order to get people to turn out to vote, especially for a big change, right? And what you guys are talking about in many cases are really big changes to how we consider voting. The language in many cases has to be kind of apocalyptic. The stakes are super high. You've got to get off your sofa to go vote. You've got to take a risk on this new thing. So you have to have kind of emergency alarm bells are ringing rhetoric. The risk of that is if it's too alarmy, people hide under the sofa. They don't go out. They think we're all doomed. If they lose, they think I tried to make it better. We're doomed, and they stay home, or they demonize everybody who disagrees with them, which makes for bad politics. But if you don't raise the alarm bells, maybe they're unlikely to vote. So how do you walk the line between, Dustin, as you said, making it better, right? How do you motivate people enough to make it better without being so extreme you demotivate them and you make them think that things are actually worse than they thought they were to begin with? Where's that ethical line? Dustin, what do you think?
Well, I think you have to do the little things well. I think just in terms of running a campaign, I guess my broad answer to your question is you got to be accurate for the most part. I mean, you have to have your if we're talking about a political reform, you can't overpromise. People will find out later if you overpromised, and we see repeal efforts for some of these reforms that get adopted some places. So you can't overpromise too much. You need to be accurate about what the reform will actually do. To your point, the kind of the doom and gloom language can be a great motivator to get people to the polls. And so, for a change that's good, but maybe not. I mean, how many voters are excited about the phrase proportional representation? I mean, it's a terrible mouthful, right? We say, sell the brownie and not the recipe. That's not something we came up with. A lot of people say that, right? But talk about the benefits of the system. A better, healthier politics. A lot of ways you can talk about benefits of something like proportional representation, but do the little things well in terms of have real local support, and make sure that it's a locally driven campaign and that you have folks on the ground who are championing it and who want to go to brunch and then go out and canvass because they think it's actually a good idea that they believe in, that they know would be helpful for their community.
Yeah, Andrew, you work in an even thinner space. You're not calling for specific reform. You're simply encouraging everybody to be better. So how do you be exciting enough to be motivating without being so over the top? Everybody thinks, to the heck with it all. I'm going to brunch and I'm not going to canvass.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's civility. That's a word, right? People love it or hate it. It's kind of an old-fashioned word, but really it just means showing respect to the other person, and particularly doing that when you disagree. Like, again, I'm just a consultant for the Reagan Foundation, but we look at President Reagan and his friendship with Speaker Tip O'Neill. That was an inspiration to the center and to me as I do the work that I do, and as the center does the work that the center does. And I don't know. I mean, this might be really, well, look, I work for the Center on Civility and Democracy. I'm allowed to be high-minded. If this kind of friendship from the 1980s is still inspiring people 40 years later, and most people don't even know who Tip O'Neill is unless you happen to know about the Tip Reagan friendship. If you want to have a legacy, if you want to be remembered, and for good reason, it's worth being civil. It's worth leaning into those things. Those things will last much longer than the negative cycle that we live in, the negative times that we live in. Yeah, so I just want to say that. I don't know. If anybody's out there and wondering, should I be civil or not? Definitely be civil. And that doesn't mean, one more thing on this, doesn't mean compromising your views at all on policy. It doesn't mean compromising your position. All it means is showing respect to the other person and communicating to them with respect.
I'm on the advisory board for the Stubblefield Institute for Civil Political Communication at Shepherd University. Absolutely echo that. You don't have to apologize for making excuses for wanting to be civil. And for the record, I went to Emerson College in Boston in the 1980s. Very well aware of who Tip O'Neill was. I want to get even more specific. In registering, a registrant named Dre Samuelson asked, I think, like the question of the moment for a conversation like this. Paraphrasing a little bit, if you were running for Senate, what single reform would you promote which would both have a significant impact and be popular enough to help you win? Dustin, what's your answer?
Well, it's a great question from Dre, who's a good friend, and I think he's thinking the same thing I am, which is I would say break up the two-party system. And that is something that, I was with Dan Osborne in Nebraska last year, and that's something that he said that that resonated well with folks wearing red hats in rural bars and restaurants that we go to that are big Trump supporters, and with Democrats in Omaha. People aren't happy with the two-party system. Something like 60 to 70% of the country say they want more than two options. So that's not that's not talking about the kind of getting into the weeds of various reforms, but there are reforms that do that. That's the brownie. You can talk about the recipe as the sort of the backup for it, but that's what I'd say. And I think a second part of that is money in politics, that we need to find ways to improve our campaign finance system. And again, there's the language you use is not we got to get campaign finance reform and blah 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 about the in the weeds of it, but get money out of politics.
Andrew, what do you think? What's the if you're running for Senate, what's the single reform that would matter and you think would help get you elected?
Yeah, I'm not so much. Look, I have mixed feelings about money in politics. Right? If you even look at, kind of play devil's, I'm not even called devil's advocate. Who funds Marjorie Taylor Greene? Who funds AOC? Small dollar donors. It's not the wealthy. It's not the mega rich. So that's a conversation we have another time. But I'm actually very, even though I am a member of one of the two major political parties, it won't be hard to guess. I am in favor of changing at least the two-party system, break the two-party system. Personally, can't speak for anybody that I've worked for, any of the clients I've worked for, or that I currently work for. Just speaking personally, I would love that. I think that would be healthy for our politics if we had a multi-party system. Another reform that I've been hearing a lot more of recently, and I think it's really interesting, are citizens' assemblies or other forms of direct democracy. So what a citizens' assembly is it's kind of like jury duty, but instead of deciding if somebody's guilty or not, these people who are called in, who have to be representative of the state or of the town or wherever they are, they get to weigh in on a policy issue. So in Ireland, for example, it's kind of a weird example, but it was huge when it happened. They had complete ban on abortion for decades. They were one of the last standing countries to still do that. And I'm not actually even saying that I love where they went with the direction of their policy on this, but it was a huge hot button issue, culture war, huge issue. Legislature didn't know how to handle it. And so they pulled together a citizens' assembly who heard from experts from different sides of the aisle, from different sides of the issue. Then they kind of deliberated and then voted and said, this is what we recommend. And a strong majority in that citizens assembly recommended loosening the barriers on abortion in Ireland. I don't think it's as kind of free as it is here in some states, but it was less restricted than before. And that was really interesting. I think one more thought on this, Bill Buckley, the founder of National Review, he once said something like, I'd rather be governed by the first 100 people in the phone book than I would by, kind of the educated elite. He was populist in that sense before MAGA. And I agree with him. I think we need to have a more representative, we need to have more representative elected officials, a more representative process. I think that's part of why MAGA is resonating. For a lot of people, they feel represented in a way they didn't before. I would love to see that sort of sense of populism in different forms that I think maybe even more people could resonate with.
Interesting. There's so much to unpack there. The Athenians would be very happy with you. Somewhere the ancient Greeks are smiling. I want to do two final quick questions that shift gears a little bit. A lot of the questions that people asked when they registered weren't about the specific topic, but about politics in general and how do we make politics less awful. And I think we've gotten to that. We'll get to that more. Maybe we'll do a future one of these on money in politics. It is fairly complicated, but I'm going to open the aperture a little bit. So one of the a question I actually have to ask from my dad, and not just because I want to stay in the will, but I think it's a really interesting question, especially for students who may be watching this. What lessons did you learn early in your career that you thought were right or useful, but that later in your career you changed your mind about?
Yeah, think about that one.
He was also an academic and an academic administrator, so he's also good at asking puzzling questions.
I like to pretend that I'm still early enough in my career that I'm young and can change my mind later. And so I don't know. Talk to me in 20 years. I don't know.
Let me hop in with this, Dustin. Let me hop in with this. This is not the beginning of my career, but it's not even the beginning of my political experience, but it was very influential for me. So I worked in local politics in Arizona for a swing district. At the time I was a Democrat, and it was a very moderate Democrat that I worked for. It was the first time a Democrat had won that seat. A Democrat had won once ever for 2 years. But then the year that I was there, we won 2 out of the 3 seats, and it's been blue ever since. And a lot of that was moderation. And I'm a very moderate guy. I think sometimes I have over applied that. You can go, yeah, you're going to win if you're moderate. Well, that's not always true. I would argue that Biden was a lot less moderate than a lot of people seem to think he was. Donald Trump obviously did not moderate on immigration. He went further right than before, and that was arguably actually one of the reasons he won. So I don't know if that's like a good lesson or a bad lesson, but I guess I would just say moderation is overrated in itself.
Sorry, Peter. I was gonna say I agree with that, Andrew. In fact, if I was to name a kind of a previous misconception, it'd be probably similar. At least moderation for the sake of moderation is nothing. What is moderate compared to what? And in fact, we know based on research that like most moderates, most people that don't have a home in one party or the other, in fact, have a lot of different extreme views from both sides. And there's like a myth that there's this middle of the country. And that's kind of what Elon Musk's mistake when he's talking about, I'll form a party with the 80% in the middle. That's not real. There's not a middle that you can just find and speak to. So I think that's right.
Good lessons, even from somebody so early in his career like you, Dustin. Before we hit the 1:30 mark, Andrew, generally optimistic or pessimistic about American politics?
Well, optimistic or pessimistic? That's a tough one. My wife will tell you that I'm a pessimist by disposition, but And I will tell you, a lot of things are not looking good. But one of my favorite scholars, Yuval Levin at the American Enterprise Institute, has this ethos. He says it's not about optimism, which is just expecting something good to happen. It's not about pessimism, which is assuming something bad will happen. It's about hope, which is commitment to something positive and commitment to stay in the fight in a positive, constructive way. That's all you can have. You can't predict the outcomes. Just do your best. Try to live ethically, and let the chips fall where they do.
Dustin, optimistic, pessimistic, hopeful? Yuval Levin. Also, I've heard Derek Kilmer give the same speech.
I love both Levin and Kilmer.
I like Kilmer.
Kilmer is great. I would say extremely pessimistic in the short term and hopeful, optimistic in the long term. I think we've talked about Musk a lot. The Lancet, the medical journal, I think a week ago came out with an estimate of the cost of U.S. aid going away, and it's something like 14 million dead over the next 5 years. And so I feel like we've mentioned Musk enough that I have to mention that, because that is a catastrophe of death that, even if that's a third of the way true, and we can somehow calculate it, the costs and the damage done by this administration are truly hard to calculate. So pessimistic for right now, but I think that even just in terms of what we're talking about here, communication, Democrats, I think are at risk of overlearning one of the lessons that they learned in the last cycle, which is that you need to talk about economic issues and the kitchen table issues and people's cost of living, and that's absolutely right and absolutely crucial. And coming from the Osborne world, I totally agree with it. But there's also an opportunity to talk about hope and to try to present a moral vision, particularly when we have all this carnage potentially happening in this current administration. So I think Bush was a moral leader, like him or hate him. Obama was a moral leader. Reagan was certainly a moral vision for the country, good or bad, whatever you think about it. Trump is a transactional leader, and in many ways, Biden was a transactional leader, saying, vote for me and I'll beat the other guy. There's an opportunity right now, I think, for Democrats who are ambitious ahead of 2028 and certainly in 26 to actually try to present a positive moral vision for the country with some hope, and reform. The chance to actually make politics better is a crucial part of that.
Great note to end on. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I saw you had a question in the Q&A, didn't get to. I'm sorry. But these will be continued. We'll have more of these and onward into whatever madness comes next. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us on.